Is Avowed a boring, overbloated Skyrim wannabe that has earned all the hate that it's gotten? Or is it a well-crafted action RPG that stands on its own merits apart from the criticism? Welcome to another episode of Player Skip on GameList Plus. I'm Josh, and today I'm reviewing Avowed for Xbox Series X and PC. As usual, I will go over all the different aspects of the game, giving each a rating between 1 and 10, 10 being flawless. I'll give an overall score and the verdict of whether or not you should play or skip the game. Stay tuned to the very end of the episode where I will talk about the immense amount of hate that this game has been given, and why the hate's been given, and if it really deserves it or not. First of all, what is Avowed? Avowed is a first-person action role-playing game set in Obsidian Entertainment's Pillars of Eternity universe called the World of Eora. Avowed is specifically set in a region of Eora called the Living Lands, which is being afflicted by what is called the Dream Scourge that is slowly turning its inhabitants into mindless, confused, zombie-like creatures, where your custom-created character is what is called a godlike, who's an individual influenced by a god during their conception. The game consists of your character tackling the Dream Scourge, the godlike voice in their head, political intrigue, exploration, combat, and ultimately your character finding the answers to the problems of themselves and many of the others around them. So, how is it? First, I'll talk about the graphics. This is one of those games where people's personal taste for graphical style gets muddied with the actual quality of the graphics. Avowed's a very colorful game. It's a bit more colorful than many hardcore fantasy RPG fans may ideally like to experience. I personally like the graphics overall in this game, and I think that they are really impressive, and I like light, bright colors as well. Not always, but in this case it seems to fit. It's one of the first times I've actually just sat kind of in awe seeing all of the different aspects of Unreal Engine 5 running at really high capacities, unlike I'd ever seen before. Upon getting the game, I started playing on my Xbox Series X in performance mode, which gave me good graphics with approximately 60 frames per second. I then played it on cloud streaming on my phone by using Xbox Game Pass, which honestly looked about the same as the Xbox Series X, but it's kind of hard to tell on a small screen, especially with the compression that happens when you stream over the internet. It's just not quite the same. Still looked good though. And finally, I ended up playing it on my PC, and once I tried it on there, I just couldn't go back. I was able to really crank up everything to its highest level, and it just looks beautiful. The reflections with ray tracing and DLSS all running at full speed make the game look truly fantastic, and the high frame rate makes all the difference. The graphics are an interesting mixture of somewhat realistic looking areas with rocky landscapes, flowing water, and nice flora and fauna, mixed with very bizarre fantasy looking mushrooms and multicolored shapes and roots and muddy, dusty, and barren ground. Realism isn't really what they were going for here, but it does look pretty amazing with the lighting effects. And it's very charming and super colorful and intricately crafted as a fantasy world, and I really enjoyed it visually. It's not perfect by any stretch. The animation of some of the characters as they talk is sometimes a little muddy and strange, and it just feels a bit off. And there's a jerkiness and skipping as you go through dialogue, which eventually you just kind of get used to. While the style may not be everyone's cup of tea, the quality of graphics, especially on the higher end settings with the PC, are definitely very easy on the eyes. Even playing on the Xbox Series X in performance mode, it is a very nice looking game, especially when you start throwing around magic spells and see the really cool and explosive visual effects. All around, I give the graphics in Avowed an 8. If you're enjoying this video, this is the perfect time for you to hit that like button. It really does help my channel out a lot. And also don't forget to hit subscribe so you can see all my upcoming videos. Next, I'll talk about the gameplay. The gameplay in Avowed at its absolute core is the combat. And I just have to say, it is a lot of fun. In a world where people are inevitably comparing this to the likes of Skyrim, which I emphatically suggest that you don't do, there are definitely a lot of similarities, and in a lot of good ways. I chose to play the game as a full wizard build, so I can't really speak too much to the melee combat. At the beginning, I wanted to play essentially as a magical archer, but all around the archer part of the build just didn't really match up with the way I was trying to go with the wizard build. Ultimately, I ended up just withdrawing a lot of those points and redistributing them into mostly wizard skills with some additional rogue skills thrown in for good measure. It's really great because you can do a lot of modification. The functionality within the game is truly one of the high points of Avowed's gameplay. The game is built for customization. You can mix and match all kinds of different skills, abilities, and powers into one character if you so desire. While using magic in this game, you use grimoires, each with their own sets of spells. You can also learn the spells individually and separately through the skill tree. In turn, it will level up the grimoire spells that you have in your hands. By the end of the game, I had a bunch of really powerful spells along with some really fun summons like a bear and an elemental. It takes a minute to get used to this magic system, but overall it's really fun to actually use different grimoires that you can quickly switch between along with your wand that quickly sucks up your stamina as you're blasting away at enemies. Different combinations of spells and grimoires give you all kinds of options to play with. Ultimately, you'll be using fire, ice, poison, electricity, and magical energy attacks, all of which have pretty phenomenal high-level spells. They all have their own bonuses and fun factors to them, but using freezing spells really is the strongest out of all the elemental stuff that you'll use in this game, especially when you get damage multipliers going. It's pretty overpowered, to be honest, but I mean, who doesn't want to be overpowered when you're using magic? You just blast through everybody. The gameplay really is a lot of fun when you're in the midst of combat. The system is well balanced, and even though sometimes it feels a little bit overwhelming, gaining a victory by timing your attacks and using proper defense really does make for a rewarding battle system. You'll also find as the game progresses that there are definitely specific allies that you're going to want to have by your side, depending on your playstyle. One of the things I learned pretty early on is that your actual weapon strength is a massive importance in this game. When you've decided on a build and you start building towards it, you really need to start working on getting the best possible weapon build on the highest strength you possibly can in association with the skills that you develop. This is where the use of crafting and upgrading becomes incredibly important. An odd factor about this gameplay is honestly the fact that money really is not anything special in this game. You can collect a lot of money as you go through the game, but everything worth buying is so expensive that it almost doesn't even matter. You could buy a couple of powerful items and you'll be tapped out. Although, I do recommend using your money to buy lockpicks from every single vendor that you find. You'll need them as you find all kinds of locked chests throughout the game. Weapons cost way too much money, but upgrade materials are actually worth getting from vendors. I ended up finding really good weapons and dismantling old weapons whenever I'd find them to build my own main weapon. You'll probably find something much more valuable and much rarer just by waiting and exploring the world. And exploring is another aspect of Avowed that is truly well executed in this game. Rather than just massive, endless open world maps, you explore very hand-curated large areas that really feel well thought out. If you see something that looks like there might be some hidden treasure up on a ledge, 95% of the time there definitely is something up there. It's one of the highlights of this game in terms of keeping your interest as you play. On the flip side, as you progress from one large region to the next, the systems for building up the weapons and items for that area are pretty much exclusive to that area, which definitely takes away from your desire to go back and collect little bits of that last region. The power, the quality, and the value of everything just jumps up so much from region to region. Just for the sake of pointing out the difference, this is not an open world game like Skyrim. Everything is sectioned off, and you progress within each area. It's not unlimited. In Skyrim, you literally can go anywhere, and there is no sectionality to it. I mean, there are cities, of course, in different areas, but you just upgrade continuously in the direction that you feel. And that's not to say that this is a bad thing, it's just a very different type of game in that respect. It really is best to just play this game on its own merits, and don't expect it to be another game. I will talk more about that at the end of the video. Avowed is really a fun system all around, so I give the gameplay in Avowed an 8. Next, I'll talk about the story. As much as I really wanted to love and care about the characters in this game, I just didn't. That's not to say that I didn't care at all, I certainly did, and it's interesting to see certain storylines be played out by these characters, but I just didn't fall in love with any of them in the way that I have in other games. I just feel like there were so many missed opportunities for the character building. Beyond going deep into the lore and history of each of the characters, which is all very technical and just doesn't feel very personal at all to me. So much of the way that the game's story is portrayed from beginning to end is so deeply steeped in the lore of the Pillars of Eternity universe that it feels a bit more like a history lesson than a personal story. If you're deeply entrenched in the lore built by the Pillars of Eternity games, Avowed is going to be a welcome addition for you to go back through all the different elements and sub-stories and political histories through all the books that are scattered throughout the world. For me though, I really just kept picking up the books and adding them to the library. I didn't bother reading any of them. I just wasn't that interested in all that extra information when I just wanted to get to know these characters that I was playing with a little bit better. And even in that, it just doesn't happen very fluidly. Like, they just didn't appeal to me that much. I want personal stories that actually affect me in a more direct way, and it just felt like there were so few stories that really did touch me emotionally. Out of any of the characters, I feel like Kai's storyline was the most personable, and I felt somewhat connected to him. But the overarching storyline of the game itself feels very surface level, and truly from the very beginning is pretty predictable. As much as the voice acting is high quality, there are so many times I was playing this game that I just felt like everyone was talking way too much. There's a saying when it comes to telling a visual story like you would for a film or a video game that you should always show, don't tell. Sadly, so much of the time in this game, characters are just telling you what happened, and it can become very tedious indeed. Although I wouldn't say it's terrible, I definitely don't feel a whole lot of feels when it comes to the story in this game, so I give the story in Avowed a 6. Next, I'll talk about the sound. The sound in this game is actually really phenomenal. From the very beginning with the opening intro music to the final end moments of the game, the music itself is very well orchestrated and sweepingly appropriate from area to area and from scene to scene. The voice acting is phenomenal from all the performers, with the most recognizable voice definitely being Brandon Keener, who plays Garrus in the Mass Effect games. In Avowed, he plays Kai, who's definitely the most likable and interesting character, largely because of that performance. The sound effects all around with the magical blasts, sword clashes, bow twangs, and all the little sound effects in between also sound really excellent in Avowed. Although I must admit, there are certain moments where if you have the volume too high and you're just doing a lot of things, there's lots of people attacking you and lots of spells happening, it gets really chaotic and rather loud, honestly. But it's more of an observation than a complaint. It's just a lot going on. Sound is such an essential part of any entertainment experience, like a movie or a game, and it's phenomenal in this game. Really, really top notch. So I give the sound in Avowed a 9. And finally, let's talk replay value. Now, as interesting and fun and in-depth as this game is, I really have to say after I beat it, I didn't even bother going back to dig through all the areas to collect all the treasure. I might have had a lot more interest in continuing to play if it weren't for a blaring factor within Avowed, which I think is a huge flaw. When you reach the point of no return, like you do in most games, where if you continue from that point you will not be able to return to complete missions, etc., rather than 30 minutes to an hour of remaining gameplay, or even an hour and a half or whatever to get to the ending, I was met with an incredibly daunting 3+ more hours of gameplay to reach the final end boss and actually beat the game. The whole time that I was in that last 3.5+ hours, I started getting all of these items and power-ups that I'd been desperately wishing I could get throughout the game leading up to that point. Upgrade materials, etc., that were just nowhere to be found or really rare, all of a sudden were just everywhere. And as you're getting all these awesome upgrade materials and weapons that are just being dumped on you battle after battle, area after area, it starts to feel a bit ridiculous. I knew that there was no going back because the game had told me that. Having acquired all those powerful upgrades and knowing that I'd have to go back and re-explore and dig and try to just find the more basic stuff, it simply killed my motivation to go back and finish up all those missions that I didn't complete, or watch all those chest opening animations that at that point seemed a bit tedious. When it comes down to it, it would be fun to play with a completely different character build, but in any case, I give the replay value in Avowed a 7. So what's the verdict? Ultimately, I have said ultimately far too many times in this review, but really when it comes down to it, Avowed is a great action RPG that deserves its own credit as its own standalone fantasy game, apart from the likes of Skyrim or any other of the fantasy RPGs that are out there. It's important to let this game just stand on its own existence. It has an excellent battle system with great magic use, it feels really well balanced, it's challenging, it's very visually appealing, and whether or not it's a style appealing to everyone, it looks fantastic. It sounds great, it has great performances from all the actors that are in it. Sadly, it lacks replay value because it's just so much work to get so little for so much of the game, and then a total loss of motivation because of how much things change in late game. The story leaves a lot to be desired unless you absolutely love deep lore that exists within other games in the same universe, but all that aside, for me, this game really is such a welcome experience. This is another great game from Obsidian Entertainment, and it shows that they still have good bones in their creative body as a whole. Even though it's not the most incredible or massively impactful game, it's solid. There just aren't enough high-quality fantasy RPG games out there in the gaming world these days, and this game scratches that itch quite nicely. Avowed is certainly far from perfect, but despite its flaws, I found myself loving this experience all around, and ultimately I give Avowed an 8 out of 10. So should you play or skip the game? Avowed is a challenging, multifaceted, and well-crafted action RPG that I think you should play, especially if you're a fan of this type of game and you feel the same kind of longing for at least something similar to games that we've loved in the past. Now let's talk about the hate really quick. This game got so much hate for so long because some of the political statements that were made by one of the developers on Twitter, and people were really gassed up about it. And it was all about pronouns and silliness that really just doesn't affect the gameplay in my opinion. Other people who hate on this game are people who simply wanted this to be a new Skyrim, and Obsidian made it very clear early on that this was not going to be a new Skyrim, and that it was its own type of game, at least on the most basic level. And it truly is. There are so many comparisons to Skyrim to be made for the gameplay, for sure, but there are so many differences that are so blatant, which for many people was a problem, and remains a problem even now. I think the issue is people just refusing to play something because it doesn't live up to the expectations of what they think it should be. I just don't think it should be compared so closely to Skyrim. I get that there is need for comparison to a certain degree, but it's really important to let it live on its own. But you know, it's hard to convince people that have unrealistic expectations of something to be something that it just simply isn't. That's not to say that we don't have the right to our own judgments and about how we want to feel about a game or whether we'll play it or not, but I just don't think Avowed deserves all the hate that it got. It's actually a really good game that stands really well on its own 2 feet. But you know, that's just what I think. What do you think? Have you played Skyrim? Do you think it's unfair to compare the two, or do you feel like it's completely justified? Do you hate Avowed? Tell us why. Do you think it's even possible to reach the pinnacle that Skyrim reached ever again? Let's talk about it in the comments below. And while you're here, why don't you check out the best big RPGs that have been squeezed onto the Nintendo Switch that you can play on the go right here. That is it for today's video. Thank you so much for joining me. Go try something new. I'll see you next time on GameList Plus.
But let's not dwell on unpleasant matters.